A good, thorough, and presentation of what has happened in the world of finance, banks, the conditions for how banking is actually changing in terms of crisis, in terms of regulations, and in terms of the kind of interest that policymakers have in this sector. Why is it important? Well, it's important when we are creating algorithms or creating models to define customer value or efficiencies in this space. Now, this thesis is kind of novel in its sense, and it's time now to bring some more perspectives. And I'm glad to invite to the stage Per Haaland from Financial Supervisor Authority or Finansinspektionen. Please, Per, and Evelina, Anttila. You're joining us from an AI perspective, Peltarion, which is offering an AI platform to the markets. She's the General Counsel and in charge of ethical issues. And Mark Ryan, please join us. And sist men inte minst, as we say in Swedish. Last but not least, please, Paolo Sironi. Please take a seat.
So we switch the beers. I go under yours.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
I understand your envious. That's okay.
So, every time a new perspective or new idea is brought into the market somehow by somebody genius, it needs to be negotiated. And negotiation is going to take place now. So we're going to have different perspective on matters. I'm going to let you introduce yourself. And we're starting with you, Mr. Per.
Right, Per Haaland. I'm a financial supervisor. I've been working for 2 decades with governance, risk and compliance, often with connection to business development, technology-driven business development. Last decade, I've been working with operational risks and data quality assessments in regards to the Solvency II directive, and I suspect that my next decade will be focused on artificial intelligence and legislation.
Thank you.
Yes, I'm Evelina, Anttila, and I work at Peltarion with the legal issues and ethical issues. And Peltarion is an AI company from Sweden, and we focus on deep learning. So we have built a platform which makes it easier for companies that do not have their own AI experts or expensive infrastructure to actually get started in using AI in their businesses. And the platform allows you to do everything from pre-processing of data to building models and putting them into production. Glad to be here. Please.
Thank you. And Mark, please.
My name is Mark Ryan, and I'm a postdoctoral researcher at KTH University. I'm specializing in artificial intelligence ethics. I've written papers in the past before about self-driving vehicles, robots in social care, how AI is used in a broad array of different social domains such as governmental, agricultural, sustainable development. In my previous project in the Netherlands, I was a postdoctoral researcher on Sherpa, and we conducted 15 case studies and scenarios on a broad spectrum of domains from insurance, healthcare, science, and so forth. Out of all of the different domains that we looked at, the one domain that we couldn't find anyone who wanted to be interviewed was the financial sector. So the issue of transparency and the opaqueness within the financial sector is definitely relevant and of interest to me. Thank you.
Very good.
Do you want to move your chair? It feels
It's
like you
very
have the light.
blinding. It's like I'm seeing the light.
Go a bit in front.
So I'm going to be moderating this discussion now, and I was hoping that we could split the time between 2 parts. First, to discuss and relate to the financial market thesis. Can I call it a thesis?
You can call it theory, whatever.
Theory. Thank you. And then the rest of the time we're going to allocate to see what comes out of your. Can I call it a survey?
Sure.
Your survey. Yeah. Thank you. So, guys, ladies and gentlemen, what should we think about this theory of financial market transparency? If we start with you, Per.
Oh, thank you. And Paolo, I think it was a great presentation. I didn't expect it to be so human. So we're beginning to be so human.
If you ask me who am I would say an Homo sapiens.
All right. I suspected as much. But I noted a few things. The essence of the human being, which is like some kind of platform for your thesis. And then these aspects: survival, purpose, time, and uncertainty. And before I go on, I would just like to stress that nothing of what I say here tonight is sanctioned by this supervisory authority. And the reason for that is that we're a little behind. We're a little behind. We haven't really caught up to the development. We're working with it. So what I'm going to give you here tonight is my opinion, my perspective. It's very dark. It's my darkest thoughts. Maybe you should feel privileged because not even my wife get access to my darkest thoughts. But your perspective, Paolo, survival, purpose, time, uncertainty. My perspective in all of this is actually summarized as fear. And those four elements, I think, can be summarized into fear. I have here a report published by the National Council for Crime Prevention, I think they're called in English, BRÅ. And it's called Cultures of Silence. And they pose a really simple question. Why don't witnesses to crimes want to testify? And one of the answers is because they're afraid. And why are they afraid? It's because of something called intimidation capital. And intimidation capital is someone else's potential to harm you. And I think we have the same problem when it comes to artificial intelligence. And my claim, or what I think is going to happen, is that transparency isn't going to be the problem, but political correctness is. We are going to be so focused on not offending anybody, so our artificial intelligence solutions, they're going to be front-loaded with our biases. And they're going to be front-loaded with the current socially dominant paradigm. We're not going to contradict it. And that's going to lead to the factually accurate models where we have distinct definitions. We can go down and we can decide in a binary fashion what's right, what's wrong. It's a 0, it's a 1, it's true or it's false. We're not going to dare to talk about this. We're not going to dare to introduce this into the artificial intelligence. I wake up every morning and I ask myself, what word, what term, or what kind of idea am I not allowed to entertain today? And I feel that this, in Swedish we call it the opinion corridor, åsiktskorridoren. I feel it's getting more and more narrow. There are more and more people that will get offended by words, by ideas. So what's going to happen with artificial intelligence in the financial sector is that the gap between the factually accurate models and the artificial intelligence models is just going to increase until we end up in a situation where the artificial intelligence models are absolutely useless, at least for making decisions, business decisions. We might be able to fool consumers with artificial intelligence. We can tell them the time. Yes, let's not get into that. But the interaction between the consumer and the artificial intelligence, it's going to be entertaining. It's not going to be very valuable. And my main point is that this gap is going to be so big that artificial intelligence is basically going to be useless.
Good. Now you know.
AI people.
I'm going to ask you to wait for, because there's going to be more perspectives coming in.
Nobody brought weapons, right?
Good.
You never know.
Yeah, I think generally speaking, there are many ethical concerns, and what's common for these issues is that they either concern ethical quality of predictions or the outcomes, or impact to humanity. But I think of three challenges when we talk about the financial market, and it's AI bias, and it's transparency, explainability, and accountability. So if we first talk about AI bias, it starts with understanding its sources. Data is, of course, a big source of AI bias. Take, for example, an organization that wants to build an AI system but have poor tax accounts. Well, the AI system might make bad decisions when it comes to tax advice. But data is only one part of the story, so bias can creep in from other sources too. Everything from how the problem is framed by the researcher, how to train the model, and how to deploy the model. And when it comes to, or actually how to solve that, I thought of that as well. I think it's going to be super hard to identify bias. It requires a rigorous audit, and I think the audit is more difficult when it comes to bad AI decisions than bad human decisions. But what I think will help is having a interdisciplinary effort involving domain expertise. That will be required. And also just looking, not only in this room, but in general, who develops the code? Who writes the research papers? It's often men, so there's a lot of people missing out in the revolution, so it's important to include everyone. And if we talk about transparency and explainability, a lot of the ethical concerns is, of course, the black box problem. So I'm not really agreeing with you when you talk about the transparency, because partly it's because companies do not want to share their secret sauce, their trade secrets or IP, and partly because a lot of the learning is locked in large, complex math operations. But what I think we really need to do, and that involves us as an AI company, is being better to explain how the models work. And of course, accountability. So, as algorithms can make unfair outcomes, it will be needed to hold AI systems accountable. And that can be achieved through impact assessments, audits, or policy or regulation. But when it comes to regulation, I think we're really facing challenges. The very foundation of law sort of assumes that some functionalities will always reside with humans. So for example, technology has historically replaced simple functions. Take for example the car. It replaced the horse, not the driver. And now we're in a world where we try to replace the driver. And the system that we have today is not really set up to accommodate that. And secondly, AI is math. You can't just ban math because, I mean, it doesn't work. And also people tend to talk about AI as an object. It's not. And many argue that it's actually the new general purpose technology, like electricity. So what I think we will need is a more dynamic system that is more sector specific. So looking into how AI applies in different sectors, like for example in the financial markets.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks.
Now, Mark, you are having fresh thoughts on everything, I
Yes,
guess.
I
That's
just
a privilege of it.
Where are we allowed to do questions at some point?
Can we just finish the round with Mr. Paolo Sironi, and then we can invite the audience to ask questions?
Perfect.
Thank you. Maybe I wasn't clear about the order of things,
maybe I
but
missed
thank you
it.
for asking.
That's fine.
They can also provide answers.
Yeah.
Well, now it's transparently given to you that
Exactly.
it's
Now
not
I
the
can ask you
case.
stuff I cannot ask at work.
Exactly.
Now, you have the privilege of being a philosopher. And philosophers, they are clean and they have
Definitely not
thoughts.
clean, but the opposite usually. So yeah, I have three main points. So the first one was a conceptual about the consequentialist ethics. So consequentialist ethics is very, very broadly construed as placing the consequences and the results as the priority and the most ethical aspect within decision making. But under the consequentialist realm, there is real utilitarianism, act utilitarianism, ethical egoism, ethical altruism. So which specific model and theory are you analyzing? Because a lot of the ones that you criticize, they would be act utilitarianism. So neoclassical economics, capitalism in general would be very much act utilitarianism. Secondly, I don't think that transparency should be seen as a silver bullet for all of the ills within AI. So it's only one principle among many principles, many ethical principles that should be adopted. So you touched upon this as well. So we should factor in issues such as privacy, unfair bias, things such as accountability and responsibility, ensuring fair and equitable distribution of resources. There's a whole stream of different issues, and they shouldn't just all be lumped under one specific, one principle such as transparency. And then further diving into it, I would question or ask, how is it going to be implemented in practice? So within AI transparency, there's typically four categories of transparency. So there's understandability. So do the developers, do the organizations understand their algorithms? Do they understand the decisions that are being made? Do they understand the data that's being implemented within them? There is traceability. So can you trace when an issue occurs that leads to unfair, unjust, harmful consequences? Can you trace where it originated, what particular team was working on it? Explainability, so can you explain how the algorithm worked and justify it to external auditing bodies? And there's also communication, so how you actually voluntarily distribute your information and make your algorithms and make the actions and decision making of those algorithms transparent. So particularly within the financial sector, so understandability, so when stockbrokers are making decision making, I think you touched upon this in a previous video I saw, often they will work on whims, they'll work on their gut instinct, so they're not aware of why they're making these decisions in the first place. So there's a lack of understandability on their own part, why they're investing in particular stocks. It's sort of whimsical, it's intuitive. So this is an inherent problem for transparency. In terms of traceability, it's all just merged into one specific domain. So an organization cannot be pinpointed who invested in the stock at a particular time. There's a lack of reprehensibility and accountability among a lot of financial industries, unless of course it's very high profile cases such as Nick Leeson. In terms of explainability, just from my previous example, most financial institutions are very opaque about their actions and about how their processes are working. So I'm not sure how that's going to be, how it's going to materialize in practice. So it's great having the ideal of transparency. I'm just not sure how realistic it is in something as sensitive as the financial sector.
Very good. Now there are some opinions. Would you like to use?
I want to hug them all because they're all good opinions, and I actually think that they're
I
linked together.
would like to, if it's possible, like within the next 5 minutes, move over. So the remaining 5 minutes are yours.
Okay, so I will start. First of all, big data does not contain the future, does not contain everything. So that is one fact. And if we start believing that the big data tells you everything about the future, you create a mechanism by which you start creating a new model that doesn't correspond to the reality, and when that detaches from the reality, you create another collapse, and this is not good at the same time. Now, transparency is not about your transparency as the weakest link. Transparency is about making the strongest link transparent, which in case of financial services is the bank, the advisor, versus the individual client. The opposite of transparency is not privacy, it's opacity. Transparency and privacy goes hand in hand. If you have something precious like a diamond and you go on vacation, what do? You hide it. What is your most important thing as a corporation, as a bank, is your client, so you need to protect it. So the data of the client, the elements that require privacy on the individual are there, and they're not in conflict with the transparency. So that's just to set the tone, because when we discuss consequential ethics, then you can get to the point where you infuse them in the society by making everybody transparent, and so that you can start creating something like the politically correct, the political incorrectness, or the bias, non-bias, by infusing it into the way people behave. You change their behavior. It could be a Chinese scenario, if you like, and that is definitely not what I think of and I advocate for. So that is the first element that I wanted to say. The second element is the following. When you look at, we can think of a financial institution, because maybe today we bring it down into the banking sector as I started from there. But discussing finance, ethics, and AI is the following. You can have two different frameworks. One is a digital framework, and one is an analog framework. The digital framework contains data and models. The analog framework still, for a while, contains decisions and consequences, therefore results, because we're not there where AI will make every decision for you. We can have a different discussion when we discuss the Chinese example, the Chinese model. Okay, if we have the time, we go down there. But if you look at what AI can do today, basically you've got these two different frameworks. We know that AI can start getting into the decision-making element, and some people might want to let the AI to make that decision for them, and that is where we need to be very, very careful, because we reduce the capability of dealing with the potential bias that is inside, not because we put it inside, but because a model is a hard time anyway to correspond to the reality, because it does not contain uncertainty. So they always are optimization models, and as optimization models at some point become self-referential, and when they're too self-referential, they will basically break. But when you look inside here, then you can try to find ways to discuss ethics. You may have some at the level of the data is more biased than unbiased than ethics. So now we need to treat this with carefulness as well, because bias and unbiased is not necessarily the same according to the culture we're in or the place we live in. But that is a limitation. I agree with this. They can also create somehow a problem, because they can enforce on other people a view that is not necessarily the individual view. And I remind you, I try to make sure that we stay as diverse as possible, even in terms of opinion, decisions, and mechanisms. Is transparent liberalism. If I want to impose on somebody a strong will, I can look for a dictator or an algorithm that decides for everybody, and this is not my point of view. I try to make sure that instead we can access innovation by letting people free to understand and to position as much as possible, so that they can position on change and we build progress. We don't just give the authority to somebody else to decide for everybody, even an authority that we don't see, but it comes up from the way we relate to the problem. Then we have the model, not just the data. The model themselves are not correct necessarily. We said the statistical model or machine learning models, we saw it so much in the risk management in the last 20, 30 years, is a good example for the data scientists to remind themselves that models are always a sheer approximation of reality, even though they start from data. But A, we will never have all of the possible data of reality, also because I believe there should be privacy at a higher level compared to the one that we see in China. And B, we are human beings, generate data that is not part of my Facebook, that is not part of my LinkedIn, but influences reality, so that we'll never be trapped by these algorithms. And then when it gets to the decisions, you need to make sure that the decisions are transparent, that means where do they come from, which is the reasoning that was basically applied to get into that decision, so that I can also start understanding the consequences and discuss the consequences. And we get, if you like, to the very end and the consequentialist ethics. So why transparency is anyway foundational? You can think about a silly example. Sorry if this is a bit limiting, but Facebook and the problem of the fake news, right? You can debate as much as you want whether fake news is fake or not. There will always be somebody believing it's fake, somebody believing it's not, somebody believing the opinion is thorough, somebody believing the opinion is not thorough. You cannot ban people so easily. Some say, I don't let politicians pay for advertisements so that I'm good, and the others say, I let them do whatever they want. In the end, there are politicians that don't need to pay for commercials to have 6 million tweets, right? So that is not even the solution of the case. But here I give you this example. If you now open LinkedIn or Facebook and you look at your newsfeed, you see something that I don't see. You may think that we see the same thing, but we don't. 30 years ago, when I was getting informed, I was having 3 newspapers. I didn't have much information compared to today, but I knew the, let's say, bias of the editorial committee, so that I could think, okay, this is left, this is right, this is center, and I try to figure out more or less what is the truth. So in a sense, it was less information, but a bit more transparent process. Not for everybody, but for a lot of people that wanted to understand. Now, when I receive a feed, transparency is about incentives, cost, and consequences, a very specific definition of transparency. So that means, why do I see this feed in my news? Who's the person behind that? What is the digital identity? Is he an individual, a corporation, an Italian, a Russian, a French, a Swedish guy, so on and so forth? Where does it come from? Second, which is the cost? Why do I see it? Somebody has been selling my news feed space for this person to put it on me, right? So I would like to know why my data has been used and how much that person paid, whether it's paid or not, for me to see it. And the third is the consequences. That means, which is the population that at this point in time is looking at this specific news? Are they tall, small, white, black, women, men, from left, from right, rich or poor, so on and so forth? If I have this type of information, I can create some mechanism that can be ONG or governmentally driven or something else that basically try to let me understand what is happening on social media these days. So using, again, AI to counter AI in terms of letting people free to position. Not everybody may want to, but I believe that as many more people will want to look into that, they can start crippling a certain effect that becomes a consequential aesthetic, because people are free to decide and to choose if they want to do something or not. And I really need to conclude why this is happening. Because the first thing that transparency does, and that's what the European Commission is trying to do, but has a harder time of embedding it into regulation, is the following, is to let people position and understand on something fundamental. Nobody knows and owns the future. The first thing is to let people understand that the future is open. So the marketing, the expert opinion are nothing but opinions. Now, if you start from this point, what this breaks? It breaks the essence of how revenues are generated. So it forces financial institutions to look for value, because they will have to ask people to pay for those services. And if you need to ask people to pay for those services, you need to make an effort. So that's what transparency generates. Financial services are discussing this because it's already part of regulation. And that could be the starting point, if they want to do it, to showcase out of Europe how that can be done, and also how they can transfer to corporations in other economic sectors, so that with more transparency there will be, if you like, a better balance.
Thank you. Well, I'm happy that we chose these perspectives together, because this is a university and this is a place where we allow different perspectives to come together through a dialogue. And I guess this is a starting point for continuing this discussion. But I think we can allow the audience to bring forward the questions before we move to the final session. You have, I think you're...
Sure. I had a very specific question from a legal point of view that you were bringing up. You mentioned that one of the things that is changing now compared to previous technological evolution, or whatever you want to call it, is that when we moved from the horse to the car, the person it was just the technology had changed, but not actually the person and the law that applied to them. And that's now changing a bit. So I had a two-part question. So what are the trends when it comes to law? How are they taking that into account now that with this new technology you're actually replacing the human? So what are the trends from a legal perspective of how you would take that into account, and what do you do? And I had another question, but I forgot.
Okay, so let's start with the first one.
Let's start with that one.
Well, I think it's interesting because sometimes people in general seem desperate for regulation, but my feeling is, at least in Sweden and Europe, with one exception, is that we sort of wait and see what happens, which I think is good because we need laws that are fit for purpose. And the problem now in Europe is that we tend to focus so much on the ethical and legal and technical issues instead of seeing the societal and economical issues that would follow if we don't start adopting AI. And ironically, the ones who are really dealing with ethics at the moment are large US companies because they have started to apply AI. I think that approach would be good to actually start to test it in small scale, evaluate and iterate. But then we have the other half who are super desperate for regulation now. For example, the EU Commission has said that there will be a new GDPR, which is aiming for AI development or use of AI, which I think could hamper innovation. And as I mentioned before, I don't believe in a one-size-fits-all regulation like GDPR.
I remember the follow-up question. And
can we just save it because we're just going to have to move on?
Okay.
And I'm going to respect everybody's time here.
I can ask it tomorrow.
Yeah,
exactly.
You had one question before.
So we all follow.
So related to what you said, Per, about political correctness ruining the models. There are some different ways, I guess, you can treat what factors you include in the model. So if you have a classifier or a regression model, you could have like gender or zip code or these different ethnicity and those kind of factors. And I guess one thing that you could do with political correctness would be to say like, oh, you're not allowed to have any of these factors, and then you also say you have to also remove all the other factors that correlate with them, and that could of course impact the accuracy of the model. And another way would maybe be to include all those factors, but then after you make the prediction with the model, you adjust the prediction with, like, so if gender has an effect on something, then you post-adjust it so that you make it fair, and so you're not allowed to use that factor to discriminate, and then you capture that effect. And I guess another way would be that you measure the accuracy per group, so you say like, okay, for gender we have to have same amount of false positives or false negatives for men as for women, and so on. So these are some different scenarios, and I think like what will we go towards in society? Which one will be the political correct one? And what do you think about this?
Is there a quick answer to this question?
Yes, I think you're wrong and Evelina is right.
Answer.
Right. We'll explain.
But I hope
just why?
Please.
Evelina mentioned who makes the model, and that's a vital point. Who makes the model? But from the legislative view and the supervisory view, an equally important question is who evaluates the model. So if you have ethical questions or ethical solutions built into the AI model, you want a supervisor with the same ethical framework supervising that or assessing that. What if you have a supervisor that has another ethical framework and starts questioning your ethical solution? What's going to happen if you have a dominant social paradigm, and this is included by the programmer, and then you have a supervisor questioning the dominant paradigm? Now, the supervisor is not going to be immune against this intimidation threat. So what's going to happen is that if the supervisor chooses to go along, has this person really supervised something? The reason why we supervise models is because we want to find weaknesses in it. And it's going to be really, really hard for us to supervise ethical questions. If I disagree with Evelina has made one, and she's confident that her algorithm solves the ethical issues. It's compliant with the dominant social paradigm at this point. And I come in and I disagree. And I write that in my report. I disagree with these and these ethical parameters or solutions or whatever. So what's going to happen? What risk do I take? Well, I might be doxxed. My name might be spread on the internet. I might run the risk of being harassed because I'm an official person. Then I might risk being deplatformed from LinkedIn, from Facebook, from Twitter, from YouTube, maybe even from Google. Where goes my pictures, my personal documents? I can sue them, but that will ruin me. So what options do I have? If I lose my Google account, then I might lose my PayPal account. If I lose my PayPal account, I might lose my MasterCard account. And then I, as a person, am effectively disconnected with society. I am forced to use cash in a society where commercial businesses can refuse to accept the Swedish national legal tender. So will I, as a supervisor, take that risk? Probably not.
I think you're touching a good point, because I think it comes down to the definition of ethics. What is good or right, and for whom? Is it good in all contexts or not?
I know you want to move on, but I have a question.
Sorry.
Like,
Can I just ask the audience one question?
There is no time.
Can I just ask the audience?
Is irreversible.
We're running out of time. A few minutes left. I'm not sure if I can ask for your patience, or if we can use another 5 minutes, or you want to leave at 8 o'clock sharp. You decide. I'm happy that you stay longer, if you guys are.
Yeah, definitely.
I think the discussion is starting, but if...
Do we need to leave the room?
We don't need to leave, thank you. But yeah, if you have any appointment to consider, please make that time. You were going to say something and I interrupted you, I'm sorry.
No, I think I was...
I was going to ask something. So I understand the problem that you are trying to highlight, but how is that different from any other ethical discussion or decision that has to be taken now? Can you elaborate on that? Like what is very particular about having to make ethical decisions when using AI that is not from whom you give credit to? I mean,
the risk of being deplatformed from the utilities that we all are growing more and more dependent on. That's a huge risk.
If I can say, I would also add is the velocity of the things that matter a lot, because clearly we're talking about issues that we've been discussing ever since in our society, maybe more these years than in the previous years. Here the issue comes, AI is not conscious, yet not for a while. So you need to make sure that you can relate to the decision-making process that goes very fast, that can go very fast. So if you did not build it in a way that you can relate to that, you might get into a trap and you don't know how you move out into the trap. And as a business as well, you will have to disconnect. That's why, if you like, before we discussed digital and analog, and I put decision-making in the analog space, which is the human being, and we said data and models, which is the information architecture. AI is not an algorithm. Everybody that thinks it is an algorithm will make a mistake and will get trapped. AI is about an architecture. Only if you infuse the transparency principle in the design of the architecture, you can have a way of relating to that in a way that you know what happens at any point in time, and you can help people discuss, if they're free, if they are really fair or it is not fair. But on top of all of this, it goes again. Transparency is one of those elements that creates fears, if you like, right? Because you're sort of naked, they want to be naked as long as you're a nudist, and I think we should be all nudists to embrace the fact that we can be transparent in our decision-making process, but only if I allow the majority of people to look at what happens. So on cost, incentives, and consequences, I can smooth the asperities of a platformification process that can force everybody to go into one direction without banning, but letting people discuss what is underneath. If instead I don't do this, I will be forced more and more to discuss only bias and non-bias, banning and non-banning, and I might accelerate that process that effectively is not a nice outcome and we definitely need to avoid. But I do believe that we can also avoid. We just need to use technology in a way that makes sense for human beings to be used, and we can do that.
Can I comment?
Please, a short one, please,
Right.
before we move on.
It's going to be short.
Yeah.
It's just an observation. We sent out a questionnaire to a selection of Swedish insurance companies. With this questionnaire, we covered 70%, 75% of the Swedish market, and it was from EIOPA. And our opinion about this questionnaire was that it went to the core of the business model of these insurance companies. So I sent out the questionnaire to a selection, and then I called up each one, and I said, we realize that these are sensitive issues for you, and we're not going to hold it against you if you do not answer completely these questions, because we don't want to put you in a position where there is an information leakage somewhere and this questionnaire gets leaked and then becomes public. And surprisingly, many of them answered, we want to answer as transparent as we possibly can, because if we are not transparent, we're never going to be trusted, not by the supervisor, not by the consumer. So that's the reaction when the supervisor says, if you don't answer honestly, it's fine, and then go, we're going to be as honest as you
That
can.
is very cool, if you like. What we try to do tonight is to discuss transparency not in a normative way, but in a positive way, to let people see that there is an advantage to be transparent, as long as you protect in a way the clients, so that you can build the business model and move forward. Until you see that advantage, people will not move forward, and we stay where we are until the next collapse.
Very good. Thank you. Well, I hear that these questions are important, and we also engage our audience in tonight's discussion. And I would like to address to each of you a question from which the audience responded to, if it's okay. So I have done my work in the studies profession, actually distributed these questions. So the first one will go to is about who has a direct stake in a more transparent-driven financial markets. And I would like to address this question to you, Paolo. A quick response. As you see, the respondents and the audience basically have selected keywords, right?
Yeah.
There are keywords.
They have entered keywords.
Yeah. If you see this cloud that is created here, you see some of the words are more larger in size than others. Do you have any particular comment? Do you see anything spontaneously from how the audience has responded to this question? So who has a direct stake in a more transparent, AI-driven financial market?
Well, I would say, apart from the customers that should have it, maybe you cannot articulate, but the banks, why? Because in a world that gets more and more commoditized and where the big tech platforms are entering into the industry, only if you raise the bar of transparency, you can basically generate a different value that cannot be commoditized and digitized. So that you can create a different element. You have a good impact on society, on your stakeholders, which are also the employees, and you move forward. If you don't do that, it's very difficult for banks to stay afloat at the moment the economy goes further and further forward into the platformification, and only the big tech players have the scale to be a bigger volume on a commoditized business and get all the customers. So to me, it really becomes a business critical strategic element for the industry, but also for society, because we want to get into better financial relationships, not just commoditized products.
Thank you. I hope the audience is okay with this response. We move to the next question, which is what kind of innovation and reappropriation might more transparent algorithms enable? And as I hear it from Evelina, this question could be a little bit related to what Peltarion is actually trying to achieve.
Yeah.
Would you like to respond? Comment on how the audience have chosen, keywords for this question?
Yeah, and I think it comes down to trust, because trust will enable a greater adoption of applied AI.
Yeah.
And but I think it's interesting to see how technical or tech companies in general are exposed to ethical pressure. So on the one hand, we have the public pressure, of adopting certain behaviors, which is super good because we don't want another Facebook Analytica scandal. But I think the problem is at the moment that the public doesn't have an informed view of what AI is.
Yeah.
So we need to have this discussion in a broader context.
Yeah.
And then we have the internal pressure from employees, which I also think is good. Idealism of a company is a strength. And we've seen this with Google, for example.
Google employees,
So Google cancelling existing government contracts as a result of internal pressure. So yeah, I would say trust, which will basically enable all AI usage.
Okay, I hope the audience is somehow satisfied with how the panel have related to their answers. Now the next question is for you, Mark. I know you were coming from this aspect. So the question is, what are the values that more transparent algorithms in the financial markets would ideally support? And the response from the audience is this kind of large size keywords. A lot of them are big. So equality, inclusion, collaboration, information asymmetry. Would you like to take it?
Sure.
Take this question. I don't have a choice.
It's quite broad.
It's quite broad.
Yeah, I think transparency in algorithms in the financial market would certainly collaborate and benefit many of these different values, particularly in relation to equality, in relation to fairness.
Yeah.
So when people are trying to apply for loans, they're able to have redress. Wider loans have been denied.
Yeah.
So instead of just saying, the algorithm said so, if they're able to actually identify what particular data node, what particular aspect within the algorithm stated that they were denied the loan, that'd be more beneficial. So it will level the playing field. It will provide greater fairness for individuals, I would say.
Yes, inclusion is definitely chosen. Very good. I hope the audience is somehow satisfied with this comment. Now the last question is actually made for you, Per. I hope that you mentioned EIOPA, and which is a EU perspective. So the question was, will a transparent financial market in Europe be a competitive advantage for European companies? Now you may, select the subset of financial markets which you are really focused on, insurance companies if you want to.
Yeah.
So, and I see that the majority have chosen large advantage. So this is 9 out of 7. Yeah, you mentioned that before, because the companies were trying to be transparent.
Right.
When you mentioned EIOPA, or
They're going to be more transparent, but they are going to struggle so much with the issue of fairness. And they're going to be so, I'm speculating, they're going to be so afraid of harming their brand. So inclusion is going to mean that you don't discriminate on any ground, because that's going to be blown up in headlines and it's going to hurt your brand. So what's going to happen is when you include everybody and you cannot discriminate between user groups. Discrimination is part of the business model in insurance, that you give bonus to some people and you get higher premium to some people living in really disturbed areas. So if you want to be equal and fair, you have to increase the premiums, because you're going to get a higher claims rate. So what's going to happen is some insurance coverages, some kind of policies are simply going to disappear with transparency. And my main point here is that there's going to be a difference between factual accuracy and politically correct applied artificial intelligence. I think there's going to be a difference between the way that you meet the client and where you are transparent and what you base your decisions, your business decisions on. And I think they're going to be not as transparent regarding their decision models. They're going to go down into the basement, they're going to whisper, they're going to close the door, and they're going to agree on what do we do. And they're going to base those kinds of decisions on factual accuracy, completely void of fairness, equality, ethics, what have you. And then they're going go up into the boardroom and into the marketing department, and they're going to package this as something compliant with the socially dominant paradigm. So, bottom line, some insurance policies, coverages, are going to disappear. The rest is going to be more expensive.
You want to make a 30 seconds comment?
Well, no, I would say that's a very sensible argument. There is not in contradiction here, because when we discuss with the general public on incentive costs and consequences, it's definitely there. That nobody says that your individual models needs to be there. And also, there is a limit to what you can do for personalization, because you can break the mutualistic approach, and definitely I believe the regulation should look at that more carefully. And the industry understands that, because if we fire back, it will create an industry that is not sustainable. So there is definitely a balance there, which is also addressed here. If I can just say, because in the sake of transparency, how many of you took the picture of my QR code when I put it up there? Raise the hand. Okay, you. And actually, you are among the millions of those watching this streaming. Today, they did the same. I want to tell you, yes, you connected with your LinkedIn, but 10 euros were deducted from your PayPal account. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to thank our panel for the valuable comments.
Please, I was concerned. Sorry. I didn't mean to be so transparent, but now it's good.
I'm going to thank our valuable, I'm going to thank the panel for the valuable comments to these questions that the audience responded to. So in the beginning of this seminar, I suggested that one way to approach business from an AI perspective can be financial markets. Now, Mr. Paolo Sironi took us through the history of the changes that has happened in this industry and the kind of pressure and the kind of conditions that dictate what kind of AI solution can be viable and possible in this space, right? Now, the panel have actually responded to some of Mr. Paolo Sironi's theory, but they have also considered your, the answers to these questions. I hope somehow you have get a picture of the challenges of moving from an AI space to, and bring it into a financial services space. In the future, we hope to bring light to more more complicated or less complicated business space. But for now, I'm happy that you participated, and thank you, panel, once again.
Thank you.
Thank you.